Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Peter Lee returns to the show, and we discuss some of the background story on Xinjiang, a province and autonomous region in the northwest of China that borders on Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And it is part of the historical Silk Road. We also talked about the Uyghurs, the current situation in Xinjiang, the media coverage, and the escalating tensions between the US and China. In a bonus question for patrons at the end, episode 181 Extra, Taiwan and top Asia-related issues, I asked Peter which Asia issues he thinks are most pressing, most worrying, or important to focus on right now. Peter has decades of experience in East Asia, both as a businessman and a writer. He produces Peter Lee's China Threat Report, and he's been published in Asia Times, Counterpunch, and his own blog, China Matters. We recorded this on September 2nd, 2020. Peter Lee is here speaking to us he's on the road on the East Coast somewhere, and I have to up front apologize for the audio quality. We had to improvise a little bit today, but it's always the content that's more important. Peter, thank you so much for being patient with me, for getting this set up, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it, and it's great to talk with you again.
Pleasure to be here.
So today we are going to talk about Xinjiang and China, Asia in general. And I'm going to start with the title of your China report. What was it again? I read it all the time.
Well, I do have a Patreon channel called Peter Lee's China Threat Report.
That's it. Peter Lee's China Threat Report. I just read and listened to one of his latest reports on Xinjiang, which goes back to something that he wrote. And this happens, by the way, all the time with Peter Lee, whereas a topic heats up and it becomes, real in the news and in the center, and then you'll look at Peter's work and it's like, oh yeah, he's been talking about this for years. Right, Peter? How many times has this happened?
Too many times. There's in the China business, everything old is new again. Taiwan, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, they'll get cycled through the machine, repeatedly, especially because the U.S. government and people who are concerned about China, they go back to the same points of vulnerability, and they take a swing at it and they grind at it, and then when it doesn't work, or it does work partially, then they come back to it again. So that was certainly the situation with Hong Kong and Taiwan, and to a certain extent, it's also been the situation with Xinjiang.
Yeah, and I've been following Peter for years, so I'm not just saying this. Like this is true from my perspective. It was also true with the Uyghurs. That became an issue that I was interested in Syria and in Turkey. And, again, Peter's, in this case, his blog, you could go back and you can find an article several years back. And, he's already sort of touched on a topic or dug into it or explained it or whatever. So I highly recommend his work is what I'm saying. So
I'm planning to put up like 3 or 4 more articles on Xinjiang, not just archival stuff, but also more recent stuff, because it's really become a centerpiece of the Western propaganda campaign against China, and I think I have something to offer in terms of perspective and analytics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. I should have mentioned that. This is the article that I'm referring to, and the audio version of it The Xinjiang series number 1, The Crisis of Governance, is, just part one in a series. And so that's the one we'll talk about today, and whatever else you want to bring into it. I just talked to Carl Za a little bit about Xinjiang. We didn't really have enough time to talk about it. And sources, one of the things we talked about is, sources of information from this region are few, of people who've actually been on the ground and that kind of thing. So that's something that has always sort of troubled me, because I can't trust Gordon Chang or whatever his name is, or the various China hawks, who that's pretty much what you get in the media, the American media here. You get the hawks, the information's skewed, and I know that, from past experience. So, and, it's a bit of a remote region, and I just feel like we don't have that much on the ground information from people who are actually there, which makes me nervous. So...
Yeah, well, a lot of that's by design, by the Chinese also. They've got the region pretty well buttoned up over there. So the problem is that the stuff that comes out of there is, fragmentary, and also it's reported selectively. I have a feeling if there's exonerating or explanatory information about what's going on there, that's not the thing that's getting promoted on Radio Free Asia or through the Jamestown Foundation or the other people who are really at the forefront of pushing the Xinjiang Uyghur story media.
So is there a center for the China hawks? You talk about that a bit. Like, who is it that's pushing?
Well, everybody's pushing it right now. What happened, Hillary Clinton decided that she was going to use, China containment or China rollback as the organizing principle of her foreign policy. So, China hawking is a bipartisan affair. I mean, I can think of, it's easier to talk about the non-China hawking think tanks, because I can't really think of any more than one or two. I guess the Quincy Institute is kind of skeptical. But, because of the overall anxiety about China and its growing economic and military clout and regional and global influence, there's pretty much nobody in the United States, or very few people in the United States, who are not China hawks.
Yeah, that's what I've found too. All right, well, let's dig into. Let me just shut up for a little bit and let you talk more about this part one of the Xinjiang series, or maybe you want to round it out some more. I'm not sure, but I'm just going to step back and let you talk.
Okay. Yeah, so I should start out by saying I'm not a Xinjiang Uyghur truther. I don't believe that the information about the Chinese campaign of incarceration or detention is fabricated. When I started writing about the Uyghurs in back in like 2007, it was clear that China regarded Xinjiang and the Uyghurs as a major security issue. And in 2014, Xi Jinping basically issued a call saying that he was going to solve the Uyghur Xinjiang problem once and for all. So he went out there and did a tour of Xinjiang, and he highlighted what I call the crisis of governance out there. Xinjiang was traditionally regarded as a undesirable, unattractive hinterland. It's got a little bit of oil out there, but it's no good. And so the Chinese policies towards Xinjiang at the beginning of the reform era sort of leaned towards laissez-faire. And that didn't really work, because the cadres that the Chinese Communist Party had out there were not of particularly high quality. There was a very strong and growing sense of local Uyghur identity, which was linked to social and religious practice. And so Xi Jinping decided that there has to be a major social reworking of Xinjiang, of the Uyghur society out there, in order to affirm Chinese control and make sure that it was a secure base for the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of the stuff that the Chinese do is linked to Central Asia and South Asia, and Xinjiang, instead of being what literally in Chinese means the new frontier, it was the new keystone of China's outreach to Central and South Asia. So he did a lot of things in terms of trying to upgrade the quality of the local cadres, but then the fraught issue of terrorism appeared, and the people who criticize China and the Uyghurs are very loath to talk about the idea that China's Uyghur policies are at all legitimately linked to concerns about terrorism, but unfortunately, terrorism is there, and it's more than an excuse. China has been worrying about Uyghur militants long before Xi Jinping. One of the most peculiar aspects of the U.S. war on terror was the incarceration of several Uyghurs at Guantanamo in Cuba by the Bush administration, and they had been seized as part of the bounty program in Afghanistan and transported to Guantanamo, and the United States decided to characterize them as non-enemy combatants, which is to say that they were hostile to China, but not necessarily to the United States. And so they were put in a low security part of the camp, and the Bush administration and the Obama administration spent a lot of effort trying to repatriate them to friendly countries over the objections of the Chinese, who either wanted them sent back to China or left to languish in Guantanamo. And one of the most formative experiences in South Asian and Uyghur security was the storming of the Lal Masjid Mosque in Pakistan, in Islamabad, and it had become basically a independent fiefdom of Islamic militants there, and it had Uyghurs there, and they were attacking Chinese interests inside Islamabad and Chinese citizens, and so the Chinese government insisted that Musharraf storm the mosque in order to root them out, which they did at the cost of maybe 1,000 lives, but it also created a hardcore anti-Chinese militant group in Pakistan, which has always been a concern that they would continue to harbor Uyghur militants. So the militancy, and if you want to call it insurrectionary or military factor, has always been there. It's a symptom of bad Chinese governance. It's a symptom of the remoteness of the area, at least from Chinese centers of power. And so Xi Jinping decided that he was going to take care of that issue and basically secure Xinjiang and the Uyghurs for the Belt and Road Initiative and for the Chinese state in general.
Right. So just to, my understanding of this is at a much lower level than yours. Just to reiterate a little bit. So this has always been an autonomous region. It's always been a people who have an identity significantly different than, the main China. Mm-hmm. And the people here have had a relationship with the United States and the West for a long time because they were useful to us in Afghanistan, mainly for supply chain, right? For supplying weapons going all the way back to the Mujahideen. They were able to get stuff. One of the biggest problems for our military in Afghanistan, it's an inland country in a very rough terrain. So getting stuff there.
The Chinese were useful. The Chinese were useful for supplying the Mujahideen. They pretty much served as the quartermasters for the United States and the CIA. I remember that one of the things I read about was there was a global drought of mules and that were needed to, pack supplies and weapons around Afghanistan, and the only place that could supply them was China. So, they did hundreds of millions of dollars of business, sourcing and helping to deliver that stuff to the Mujahideen.
Yeah, so that's a key factor, I think, and then the other thing that you explained for me that I didn't understand before. So it's always been an autonomous region. There's always been a rebellious people who don't fit in with the rest of China very well. Maybe, and I guess they don't really want to. They want their own either autonomous region or they want their own country. And China was doing a sort of a slow walk colonization effort, as Peter mentioned, treating it like a new frontier, like, I don't know, like settling the West or in the United States or whatever. But suddenly, and this is, I guess, a piece of the puzzle I didn't get before, the Belt and Road Initiative came along, and the geopolitical, just the geography, the placement of where this place is, makes it super valuable now. And Xi Jinping decided to ramp up, so that what China had been doing was they'd been sending, I don't know if you call them settlers, you describe it as
call them internal emigres, I guess,
Yeah. And so they would set up military encampments, but it was, it was a tough assignment. It was, not a desirable. They had to entice their military and other people to go and settle there, and so that's why Peter says, they weren't the highest quality operators from the Chinese government, and so.
Yeah, but then they had Xi Jinping had the incentive from the Belt and Road, and he also had the means, thanks to China getting rather rich and powerful, to actually attempt a social reworking of Xinjiang in order to further incorporate it into the fabric of the Chinese state. The philosophical underpinnings for the policies out there that determines the strategy is an assimilationist philosophy that's called second generation ethnic policy. And the Soviet Union and early on in China, they pretty much tried to manage the issue of minorities by giving them a certain amount of autonomy and relying on the party and the military and the economic incentives to keep them in line. But that philosophy has been pretty much superseded by a new generation of sociologists who are hardcore assimilationists. And so what you really see in Xinjiang is the breakdown of traditional Uyghur social networks and their replacement by something that's radically different. And these second generation ethnologists, I think, look at places like the United States and what we did to the Native Americans as a model for what they should be doing, instead of letting these places exist and perhaps fester as localist bastions. They decided that they're going to go aggressively in terms of breaking down the old society and assimilating them into new structures. The famous camps are just part of that. It's basically, the camps are places where people are sorted, they're identified, they're indoctrinated, and then when they leave the camps, they're put into new societies, new jobs, new social relationships, which are supposed to supplant what they used to have, a lot of, including traditional culture and religious practice, and incorporate them into a new modern, or I shouldn't use the word modern, but a new contemporary Chinese state of mind as well as living.
So the camps are real.
I think so. Yeah, I think they're real, and I think there are a lot of them. I don't know how many people are actually in the camps now. because the way it looked, as I said, that they were basically pulling people out of their traditional social milieus and isolating them and classifying them. They basically split them up into people who were to worry about. There were people who needed who perhaps would respond to indoctrination and coercive policies. And then there are the hard cases who they figure are just going to have to be isolated and incarcerated indefinitely. But so the camps, I think there was a big burst of camp building, which of course in China, construction is also a major source of political power and graft. So it's clear that the buildings are there, but how many people are inside those camps right now is pretty much a question. The Chinese government said a couple years ago by now that the camps have basically been emptied out. And I'd put a little asterisk out of there, and I'd say that maybe the classification and indoctrination camps are being phased out, moving on to the next stage. And I think that that's probably something that's understood, by people like the CIA, because you notice that the focus of propaganda has switched to a large part away from the camps and to the issue of slave labor. I don't know if you've been paying attention to that, but there's now sanctions in the United States against enterprises that are accused of exploiting Uyghur labor, and that was part of the Chinese thing. We're going to take them out of their original societies and their original relationships, and we're going to teach them Mandarin. We're going to give them jobs, in Chinese factories doing Chinese stuff. And so I think that that's a significant portion of the people who passed through the camps that probably ended up there.
I mean, I guess the only thing, the doubts that I have are the sources of information, because now I've heard that most of the information about the camps came from one source and turns out to be a shaky source. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I know. So, on the other hand,
I was going to say is that I have my problems with this. The information that comes out is closely held, and I have a feeling it's it's massaged, and certain things are amplified and certain things are suppressed. So it's definitely what we see, in the Western media, like the Xinjiang papers and stuff like that. It's a result of a considered propaganda campaign. But unfortunately, the Chinese media is not much better.
Right.
They're providing selective information from their perspective as well.
Right, exactly. And now, right now, they're much more concerned about their image in the world than they ever were in my lifetime before. So that's why I reached out to you. The backstory, the background is almost more important than any specific instance of camps or whatever. The bigger story here talks about trying to basically tame this region, trying to assimilate. That's more important to me.
And I think one of the things that has a certain amount of anxiety in the West about this whole thing is that the Chinese, it might work. We like to think that decolonization struggles and struggles for national self-determination work, but quite frankly, many times they don't work. In fact, I'd say in the majority of the times, the central government, when it's reasonably prosperous and functional, as the Chinese government now is, are able to keep that stuff tamped down. So, when you think of it, even in Catalonia, which is, has hundreds of years of separatist, tradition, even they haven't been able to effectively break the hold of Spain on their local governments. So I think that what concerns the West is that, in maybe 5 years, the Chinese the Chinese program in Xinjiang will have been successful, and they'll be looking at, the Chinese state, which is more powerful and, less vulnerable than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. And the other thing, a couple important things you mentioned. China has a lot more money and resources to work with now. This is a remote region, so things like better infrastructure, electricity, internet, this kind of thing could certainly persuade a people, particularly a younger generation, to assimilate. And maybe they decide that life would be better for them if they do that. Like, that's not for me to decide. But the other part that has evolved, and a really important part, is that this region is part of the Pipelineistan or whatever, and also it's also near the former Soviet republics, all the various stands, these countries that we hear about but we don't know very much about. Maybe you could go into that a little bit, Peter, explaining just the dynamic in this region over the past, since the end of since the fall of the USSR, and the other big factor is that the relationship between Russia and China has changed quite a lot thanks to us. But if you could just explain that aspect, that was really helpful to me and helped me understand the situation.
Well, the stands of Central Asia are, various Turkic-speaking people, and the question of the creation of these ethnic identities, Kazakh, Tajik, Uzbek, all those sorts of things, it's actually a matter of some debate. Apparently Soviet ethnologists, just like the American imperialists, they looked at a map and said, okay, we're going to call this, this, and this. And as a result, we have national borders, and national identity superimposed on what's actually a lot of... that guy needs to get his muffler changed. Did you hear that? Okay.
I heard a weird noise, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you have national borders superimposed on, differing ethnic identities and, different economic and trade groups association. So it's pretty much, an unstable situation in Central Asia, and the Chinese are trying their best to order it in a way that's beneficial to China, and also I think that is welcomed by the less functional states of Central Asia, and particularly Kazakhstan, which is this enormous country, which we only know because of that Borat movie. Is it's a place which has a lot of Uyghurs in it, and during the Sino-Soviet split, the Russians were actually luring Uyghurs over the border so that they would form a nucleus of anti-Chinese insurrectionary, fighters, and or at least the locus of discontent. And so China has been extremely assiduous in courting in Kazakhstan, investing a lot of money in there, setting up a regional security initiative called the SCO, and basically doing these things that I think that the Central Asian governments actually value in terms of being able to deliver economic and public infrastructure goods to Central Asia. And part of that, of course, is, it's going to be, rolling over, traditional social and ethnic structures.
Yeah. Huh. All right. So this is a really good foundation I would like to recommend for people who are starting to look into Xinjiang or just want to understand a little bit more about it. And Peter, I hope to follow up with you. I hope I can get a little bit more of your time going forward as you continue this series and get into even more detail. But I think for now, I'm going to switch over to a bonus question, a little bit more broad question for patrons. But first of all, I want to give you a chance to, if there's anything else that you want to say about the Xinjiang situation before we move on, please go ahead and do that.
Okay. Well, I think that what I'm going to cover in the subsequent items in the series is the issue of anti-Chinese state violence by Uyghurs and Uyghur groups, and especially I think a little-known fact concerning the program by Turkey to exfiltrate Uyghurs from China and send them to fight in Syria. That is a focus of Chinese concern, because there's a little town in northern Syria which is actually run by Uyghur fighters, and the Chinese are understandably obsessed about making sure they don't get plunked back into Afghanistan and form the nucleus of a China militant group in northern Afghanistan. So that I think is something that has been virtually unreported in the West, because it messes with the whole peaceful oppressed Uyghur frame. That is something that I think is very important to the Chinese.
And I guess the concern there is now this group of Uyghurs, they have a whole new kind of training, right? They've spent some time with a lot different kinds of military equipment and with different people, so they're more battle hardened Uyghurs. Is that?
They went to Jihad-EU. In fact, I think that they were considered to be some of the best fighters in Syria. So yeah, if they get protection, refuges, and institutional support, they're going to be a big headache for the Chinese.
Huh.
Keeping them out is a pretty major focus of Chinese diplomacy with Turkey and also with CENTCOM in Afghanistan.
Oh my God! Right. Is there anything in war and geopolitics that is sort of simple to understand? Because this one's a real tangled mess, isn't it? There's a lot to it.
The media specializes in simplifying issues so that they fit into a useful frame. So and the Uyghur situation is more complicated than most.
Right. All right. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to be following. This is one of those cases where, and it happens with a lot of things, where I'm interested in a subject. I want to know more, but I'm just kind of baffled by it. I don't know who to believe. But when you dig a little bit, when you get somebody like you to I don't know, to curate, to boil things down, to put it in a frame of reference that I can understand, that just sets me on. That puts me on a path now where I can dig into it more myself. So I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And I'm going to be bugging you. I'm warning you ahead of time. I'm going to be bugging you again when more parts of this series come out. So, all right. So, bonus question. I'm going to stay very broad, but this is. We're now in a situation where things are a lot more serious with China. You can see that, basically every day, anywhere you look, you can tell that things are ramping up and getting a lot more dangerous. And, Asia in general, I guess we're not surprised because, as you mentioned, Hillary Clinton and under the Obama administration, the pivot to Asia is a thing. But also the war in Ukraine and some other things caused Russia and China to change their relationship considerably. So now this isn't just, we're mad at China again, we're going to be fighting with them again. It's really a whole new geopolitical landscape that we're dealing with. And of course, there's the economy too. So I'm worried. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, years, studying this region and, working in this region, or I forget exactly what your background is, but what are the top things, the top issues that you are worried about or interested in, or things that we should be paying attention to what are the most interesting and most important issues around this region looking forward? The answer to the bonus question is in an extra bonus segment for patrons, which you can find at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or at the website aroundtheempire.com. Episode 181 Extra, Taiwan and Top Asia-Related Issues. I'm not great at marketing. I don't like it. Definitely not my forte. But I'm starting to provide more bonus material for patrons, as is necessary for independent media like this, funded solely by listeners. And because I appreciate them, they make it possible to pay the overhead costs of the show, compensate a little bit for the labor that goes into it. So that's my tease. I hope that some of you will become patrons of the podcast on Patreon or contribute in other ways to get these kinds of extras. There are also some full episodes for patrons only, We now have a Discord channel for patrons. If you're a new patron, make sure you look through the patron posts and find that link and come join us. And I'll be doing some live stream sessions for patrons only, where we can discuss things among ourselves. Right now I'm working on an equipment upgrade and a setup so that I can do that right. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up. All right, Peter, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And please let everybody know how they can follow you, how they can find your work, how they can support your work.
Well, thank you very much. It was great to be on the show. I have a Patreon channel. It's called Peter Lee's China Threat Report. Some of the content's unlocked, but all the good stuff, or at least all the more recent stuff, is paywalled. If you're interested, you can go over there and subscribe. I'm also pretty active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @ChinaHand, ChinaHand. And there I comment on current events and also link to my various writings. So I've been in the China hand game now for 15 years. So there's a lot of stuff that I cover, and I hope that thanks to this podcast, I'm going to get some new friends and followers.
I hope so too. I definitely follow. Are you still publishing on your blog, or are you mainly on the Patreon channel now?
I'm pretty much doing all, the new stuff pretty much all goes up on the Patreon thing, because I figure I have to provide content, and but the archive is still there, and I'm also going to start putting up some of my Asia Times stuff, because apparently Asia Times, they did away with their archive. So I'm going to be posting that. I had like 100 articles with those guys, and now they're all gone, but I do have the text of them. So I'm going to be pretty accurate. Like I said, I got a lot of stuff, and for some reason it seems to be as timely as ever.
Yeah, how about that? All right, well, thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, call anytime.
Thank you for listening. A special thanks to Peter Lee. Follow Peter on Twitter @ChinaHand. Subscribe to his Peter Lee's China Threat Report on Patreon. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media, and your support's really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. There are lots of ways to find and listen to the syndicated audio podcast, any mobile podcast app, on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter @aroundtheempire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.